Sebastian Hawthorne stepped out of his expensive black car and looked around with barely hidden disgust. The community center before him was nothing like the fancy concert halls he was used to performing in. The building was old, with paint peeling off the walls and weeds growing through cracks in the sidewalk. He checked his expensive watch and sighed. This whole thing was his publicist's idea, something about giving back to the community and improving his public image. Sebastian was 28 years old and already considered one of the best classical pianists in the country. He had grown up in a mansion with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. His parents were both successful doctors who could afford the best music teachers money could buy. From the age of 5, Sebastian had private lessons with world-class instructors. He attended the most expensive music schools and won every competition he entered. Now, he was here in this rundown neighborhood because some newspaper had written an article calling him cold and disconnected from real people. His publicist, Janet, had arranged this appearance at the opening of a renovated community center. She said it would show people that Sebastian cared about ordinary folks. But standing here now, Sebastian felt like he was visiting another planet. Inside the community center, about 50 people had gathered for the opening ceremony. Most of them were families from the neighborhood, parents with young children, elderly people who lived nearby, and teenagers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Everyone was dressed simply in clothes that looked like they came from discount stores. Sebastian, in his perfectly tailored Italian suit, felt completely out of place. The center's director, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, rushed over to greet him. "Mr. Hawthorne, thank you so much for coming today. We're absolutely thrilled to have such a famous musician here with us." She led him through the small crowd, introducing him to various people who nodded politely but seemed a bit intimidated by his formal appearance. The main attraction of the new community center was a beautiful, grand piano that had been donated by a wealthy businessman. It sat in the middle of the largest room, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Sebastian had to admit it was a decent instrument, a Steinway that probably cost more than most of these people made in a year. "Would you be willing to play something for everyone?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked hopefully. "It would mean so much to the community to hear a real professional play our new piano." Sebastian nodded. This was why he was here after all. He walked over to the piano bench and adjusted it to the perfect height. The crowd gathered around, with children sitting on the floor and adults standing behind them. Sebastian cracked his knuckles dramatically and placed his hands on the keys. He chose to play Chopin's Minute Waltz, one of the most technically challenging pieces in his repertoire. His fingers flew across the keys with incredible speed and precision. Every note was perfect, every trill exactly as written in the sheet music. He had played this piece thousands of times, and his muscle memory guided him through the complex passages without effort. The audience watched in amazement. Most of them had never heard classical music performed live before, especially not at this level of skill. Sebastian's hands moved so fast they were almost a blur. The music filled the room with its complex harmonies and rapid-fire melody, but something was missing. Despite the technical perfection of his performance, the music felt cold and distant. Sebastian played like a machine, accurate, fast, and impressive, but without any real emotion or warmth. He was showing off his skills rather than sharing the beauty of the music. When he finished, the audience applauded enthusiastically. They were clearly impressed by what they had witnessed, even if they didn't fully understand it. Sebastian stood up and gave a small bow, the same formal gesture he used in concert halls around the world. "That was incredible," said one man. "I've never heard anything like that." "How do you make your fingers move so fast?" asked a young girl, her eyes wide with wonder. Sebastian smiled politely but didn't really engage with their questions. In his mind, these people couldn't possibly understand the years of training and dedication it took to reach his level. He had spent his entire life perfecting his craft while they were just ordinary people, with ordinary jobs. A few more people came up to compliment his playing. They used simple words like amazing and beautiful, but Sebastian could tell they were just being polite. They didn't have the musical education to truly appreciate what they had heard. To them, it was just fast, complicated music played by someone famous. Mrs. Rodriguez thanked him again and asked if he would consider coming back sometime to give lessons to local children. Sebastian said he would think about it, But privately he doubted these kids had the discipline or natural ability to learn classical piano seriously. Real musical talent was rare, and it usually came from families who understood and valued classical music education. As he prepared to leave, Sebastian felt satisfied with his performance. He had played flawlessly as always. These people had witnessed something they would probably never see again, a world-class pianist performing in their little community center. He had done his duty, and Janet would be pleased with the positive publicity this would generate. The grand piano sat silent again after Sebastian's performance, waiting for its next player. None of the community members approached it. They seemed to think it was too fancy for them to touch. It was like a beautiful sculpture that could only be admired from a distance. Sebastian gathered his things and headed toward the door. The crowd was starting to break up, with families heading home for dinner and children running around the other rooms of the community center. The excitement of hearing a professional pianist was already fading, replaced by the normal activities of their daily lives. Little did Sebastian know that in just a few minutes, everything he thought he knew about music and talent was about to change forever. Standing quietly near the back of the room was someone who had been watching his performance with a very different kind of attention, someone who understood music in a way that Sebastian, despite all his training and accolades, had never truly learned. But for now, Sebastian was still the same arrogant young man who had walked in 30 minutes earlier. He was still convinced that his expensive education and perfect technique made him superior to everyone in this room. He still believed that real musical talent was something only people like him could possess. The community center fell quiet as Sebastian reached for the door handle, ready to return to his world of luxury and privilege. He had no idea that his entire understanding of music was about to be shattered by the most unexpected teacher he could imagine. Sebastian was almost at the door when a voice called out from behind him. "Excuse me, Mr. Hawthorne." He turned around to see a woman approaching him. She looked to be in her early 40s with graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were clearly from a discount store, a faded blue blouse and worn jeans that had seen better days. Her hands looked rough, like someone who worked with them every day. "Yes?" Sebastian replied, trying to hide his impatience. He really wanted to get back to his hotel and forget about this whole experience. "I just wanted to say thank you for playing for us today," the woman said with a gentle smile. "Your technique is absolutely flawless." "I've never heard anyone play with such precision." Sebastian relaxed slightly. At least someone here seemed to appreciate his skill level. "Thank you. I've been training since I was very young," the woman nodded thoughtfully. "It shows." Every note was perfect, exactly as Chopin wrote it. She paused for a moment, then added softly, "Though I have to say, the piano sounded a bit lonely up there." Sebastian's eyebrows shot up. "Lonely? What was that supposed to mean?" "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean by that." The woman looked embarrassed, as if she hadn't meant to say that out loud. "Oh, please don't mind me. I didn't mean anything by it. You played beautifully." But Sebastian's ego was already bruised. Who was this woman to criticize his playing? She was obviously just some local person who probably knew nothing about classical music. "What exactly do you mean by lonely?" he pressed. The woman shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it's just that music is like a conversation, isn't it? Between the musician and the audience. Your playing was technically perfect, but it felt like you were talking to yourself rather than to us." Sebastian felt his face getting hot. This was ridiculous. He was a professional musician who had performed at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center. This woman probably worked at some ordinary job and had never even been to a real concert. How dare she suggest that his playing was somehow lacking? "I see," he said coldly. "And I suppose you know better how the piece should be played?" The woman looked even more uncomfortable now. Several other people had stopped their conversations and were listening to this exchange. No, I didn't mean it like that. I just think music should touch people's hearts, that's all." "Touch people's hearts," Sebastian repeated mockingly. "That's very poetic. And what would you know about playing classical piano?" The woman's cheeks turned red. I used to play a little. A long time ago." "A little," Sebastian said with a condescending smile. "I'm sure you did. Probably took some lessons at the local music store. Learned a few simple songs." Mrs. Rodriguez had noticed the tension and came over to see what was happening. Several other community members were also gathering around, sensing drama. "Come on, Maria," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, putting her hand on the woman's shoulder. "Don't let him upset you." But Sebastian wasn't done. His pride had been wounded and he wanted to put this woman in her place. No, please, I'm genuinely curious. Maria, is it? Since you seem to think my playing was somehow inadequate, perhaps you'd like to show us how it should be done. The crowd went silent. Everyone could feel the tension in the air. Sebastian stood there with his arms crossed, clearly expecting to embarrass this simple woman in front of everyone. Maria shook her head quickly. Oh no, I couldn't. I haven't played on a real piano in years. And certainly not one as beautiful as this. Years? Sebastian said with fake surprise. Well, then you must be pretty rusty. But surely someone who thinks my performance was lonely could show us what real music sounds like. The other people in the room were looking back and forth between Sebastian and Maria, like they were watching a tennis match. Some looked angry at Sebastian for being so rude, while others seemed curious about what would happen next. Maria looked at the piano, then back at Sebastian. I really don't think that's a good idea. This is your day, your performance. I didn't mean to criticize, but Sebastian was on a roll now. His arrogance had taken over completely. Oh, come on. Don't be modest. I'm sure everyone here would love to hear what heart-touching music sounds like. After all, you clearly think there's something wrong with professional classical training. A teenage boy in the crowd called out, Yeah, Maria, play something. You always talk about how much you love music. Play, play, play. A few of the children started chanting. Maria looked around at all the encouraging faces. These were her neighbors, people she saw every day at the grocery store and the laundromat. She could see that they genuinely wanted to hear her play, not because they wanted to see her embarrassed, but because they cared about her. I really shouldn't, she said quietly. It's been so long and I'm not a professional like Mr. Hawthorne. Sebastian saw her hesitation and decided to push harder. Look, if you're going to criticize someone's playing, you should be willing to back it up. Unless, of course, you don't actually know anything about music and we're just making empty comments. That hit a nerve. Maria's expression changed slightly, and for just a moment something flashed in her eyes. It wasn't anger exactly, but it was definitely stronger than the meek embarrassment she had been showing. All right, she said quietly, but only for a minute. And please don't expect too much. The crowd moved back to give her space as she walked slowly toward the piano. Sebastian followed, still smiling smugly. He was already planning what he would say after her inevitable amateur performance. Something gracious but clearly superior, showing everyone that there was a huge difference between professional training and casual hobby playing. Maria sat down on the piano bench and adjusted it slightly. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, and Sebastian noticed that despite their rough appearance, her fingers were positioned correctly. Maybe she had taken a few real lessons at some point. What would you like me to play? She asked softly. Sebastian was feeling generous in his anticipated victory. Oh, anything you like. Something that touches the heart, as you put it. Maria closed her eyes for a moment as if she was remembering something from long ago. When she opened them, there was a different look on her face. Still gentle, but more focused somehow. This was my teacher's favorite piece, she said quietly. Placing her hands on the keys, Sebastian stood behind her, ready to point out all the technical mistakes she was about to make. He had no idea that he was about to witness something that would change his entire understanding of what music could be. Maria's fingers touched the keys, and the first note that came out was soft, almost whispered. Sebastian was ready to smirk at what he expected to be a clumsy amateur attempt at piano playing, but something about that first note made him pause. It wasn't the harsh mechanical precision he was used to hearing from students trying to impress their teachers. This note had life in it. She played a few more notes, still quietly, still gently. Sebastian recognized the beginning of Clair de Lune by Debussy. But something was different about the way she was playing it. Where Sebastian would have attacked the keys with confident force, Maria was coaxing the music out of them like she was having a quiet conversation with an old friend. The room fell completely silent. Even the children stopped fidgeting and stared at the woman at the piano. There was something magical happening, though nobody could quite put their finger on what it was yet. Maria's hands moved across the keys with a grace that surprised Sebastian. These weren't the rough, clumsy movements he had expected from someone who claimed to be out of practice. Her fingers knew exactly where to go, flowing from note to note like water running downhill. As the melody developed, something extraordinary began to happen. The music wasn't just coming from the piano. It was filling the entire room, wrapping around everyone present like a warm blanket. Sebastian felt his smug expression starting to fade as he realized, that what he was hearing was far beyond anything he had expected. Maria's playing had a quality that Sebastian's performance had completely lacked. Emotion. Real, deep human emotion that spoke directly to the heart. Where Sebastian had played Chopin's notes exactly as written, Maria was telling a story with Debussy's music. You could hear sadness in the gentle minor chords, hope in the way the melody lifted, and something that felt like love in the way she caressed each phrase. The technique was flawless, but that wasn't what made Sebastian's mouth drop open. It was the soul behind the technique. Every note meant something. Every pause told part of the story. Maria wasn't just playing the piano. She was speaking through it in a language that everyone in the room could understand, even if they had never heard classical music before. A small child near the front started swaying gently to the music. An elderly man closed his eyes and let the melody wash over him. Even the teenagers who had been checking their phones just minutes earlier were completely transfixed by what they were hearing. Sebastian felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine surprise. His hands, which had been crossed confidently over his chest, slowly dropped to his sides. The condescending smile disappeared from his face entirely. This wasn't what he had expected at all. As Maria continued playing, the music grew more complex. She began adding her own interpretations to Debussy's original composition, weaving in jazz harmonies and subtle rhythm changes that shouldn't have worked, but somehow made the piece even more beautiful. This wasn't just someone who had taken a few lessons. This was someone who understood music on a level that went far beyond what could be taught in any classroom. The melody soared and dipped, carrying everyone in the room on an emotional journey. You could hear years of experience in every phrase, decades of understanding in every chord change. This was the playing of someone who had lived with music, breathed it, made it part of their very soul. Sebastian's mind was racing. How was this possible? This woman in her discount store clothes with her rough hands was playing with a depth and maturity that he had never achieved despite all his expensive training. She was making the piano sing in ways that his perfect technique had never allowed. The community center, which just minutes ago had felt like a foreign, uncomfortable place to Sebastian, was now transformed into something magical. The fluorescent light seemed softer somehow. The worn carpets and peeling paint didn't matter anymore. All that existed was the music flowing from Maria's hands and the profound silence of people experiencing something truly beautiful. As the piece neared its end, Maria's playing became even more delicate, more intimate. She was sharing something personal through the music, something that came from deep inside her heart. The final notes hung in the air like dewdrops, perfect and precious and heartbreakingly beautiful. When the last note faded into silence, nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. The entire room was suspended in that perfect moment between the end of the music and the return to ordinary life. Sebastian stood frozen behind the piano bench, staring at Maria's hands as they slowly lifted from the keys. Everything he thought he knew about music, about talent, about what it meant to be a real musician, was crumbling around him. This woman had just played with more soul and artistry than he had ever managed in his entire career. Slowly, one person started clapping. Then another. Then the entire room erupted in applause, but it wasn't the polite, appreciative clapping that Sebastian had received earlier. This was something different, warmer, more genuine, more emotional. People were clapping not just because they were impressed, but because they had been truly moved. Maria turned around on the piano bench, her cheeks flushed pink. She looked almost surprised by the reaction, as if she had forgotten there were other people in the room while she was playing. That was... Mrs. Rodriguez started to say, then stopped, apparently unable to find the right words. Beautiful, finished the teenage boy who had encouraged her to play. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Sebastian continued to stare at Maria, his mouth slightly open. His entire worldview had just been turned upside down in the space of 4 minutes. This simple woman, this person he had been ready to embarrass and dismiss, had just taught him something about music that no conservatory professor ever had. Maria stood up from the bench and smoothed down her faded jeans. "Thank you," she said quietly to the crowd. It felt good to play again. She started to walk away from the piano, but Sebastian finally found his voice. "Wait," he called out, his tone completely different from the arrogant challenge he had issued just minutes before. "Please wait." Maria turned back to look at him. and Sebastian saw something in her eyes that he was only beginning to understand. True musical wisdom earned through experience, sacrifice, and a lifetime of loving music for its own sake, rather than for the fame and recognition it could bring. "How did you—" Sebastian began, then stopped. He wasn't sure what question he wanted to ask first. Sebastian stood there speechless for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. The applause from the crowd was still ringing in his ears, but all he could focus on was Maria's gentle smile and the way her hands were still positioned, as if she could feel the piano keys beneath her fingers. "That was—" Sebastian started again, then shook his head. "I don't understand. How did you learn to play like that?" Maria looked down at her hands as if she was seeing them for the first time. "Like I said, I used to play a little. A long time ago. A little?" Sebastian's voice cracked slightly. "That wasn't a little, that was incredible. I've studied music my entire life, performed with symphony orchestras, trained with the best teachers in the world, and I've never heard anything like what you just did." The crowd was starting to gather around them again, sensing that something important was happening. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Maria, you never told us you could play like that," she said. "I mean, I knew you loved music, but this was professional level." "Better than professional level." Maria shifted uncomfortably under all the attention. "It's not something I talk about much. It's been a very long time since I played on a real piano." Sebastian was still trying to process what he had just witnessed. "Where did you study? Which conservatory? Who were your teachers?" "I went to the Wellington Conservatory," Maria said quietly. "In New York. I studied there for 3 years." Sebastian's eyes went wide. Wellington was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country, even more exclusive than the one he had attended. "Wellington? But that's one of the best schools in the world. You have to be incredibly talented just to get accepted there." "I was lucky," Maria said simply. "Lucky?" Sebastian laughed, but not in a mean way, more like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Nobody gets into Wellington because they're lucky. You have to be exceptional. And the way you just played? That level of musical understanding, that emotional depth, that takes years of intensive training." A woman from the crowd spoke up. "Maria, why didn't you ever tell us about this? I've known you for 5 years and you never mentioned that you went to music school." Maria looked around at all the curious faces surrounding her. These were her neighbors, people she saw every day, and she could see the questions in their eyes. "It's just not something that comes up in normal conversation, you know? It's not really part of my life anymore." Sebastian was still staring at her like she was some kind of puzzle he couldn't solve. "But why? If you have that much talent, that much training, why aren't you performing? Why aren't you teaching at a conservatory yourself?" For the first time since she had started playing, Maria's expression grew sad. "Life doesn't always go the way you plan it, Mr. Hawthorne. Sometimes you have to make choices between what you love and what you need to do." "What do you mean?" Sebastian pressed. "What happened?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, and Sebastian worried that he had pushed too far. But then she took a deep breath and seemed to make a decision. "I was 20 years old when I left Wellington," she began. "I was in my 3rd year studying with Professor Elena Volkov. Do you know that name?" Sebastian's jaw dropped. "Professor Volkov? She's a legend. I've read about her teaching methods. She only accepted the most gifted students. People said she could turn good pianists into great ones and great pianists into artists. She was an amazing teacher," Maria agreed. "Tough but amazing. She saw something in my playing that I didn't even know was there. She taught me that technique without emotion is just noise, but emotion without technique is just chaos. You need both." "So what happened?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked gently. "Why did you leave?" Maria's eyes grew distant as if she was looking back through time. "My parents were killed in a car accident. Suddenly I had to take care of my 2 younger brothers. They were only 12 and 14 and there was no one else. No other family, no money saved up. The insurance barely covered the funeral costs." The room went completely silent. Even the children seemed to sense the weight of what Maria was sharing. "I tried to keep going to school," she continued. "I worked 3 part-time jobs and took classes during the day. But it wasn't enough. My brothers needed someone to be there for them, to help with homework, to make sure they had food and clean clothes. Music school is demanding. You need to practice 4 or 5 hours a day just to keep up. I couldn't do it all." Sebastian felt something heavy settling in his stomach. So you dropped out. I had to, Maria said simply. My brothers were more important than my career. They needed me. But surely you could have gone back later, Sebastian said. When they were older, more independent. Maria smiled sadly. By the time they graduated high school, I had been away from serious music for almost 8 years. I was working as a night cleaner to pay the bills, and during the day I took care of the house and helped them with college applications. The music world moves fast. Mr. Hawthorne, 8 years might as well be a lifetime. But you never stopped playing completely, Mrs. Rodriguez observed. I have an old keyboard at home, Maria admitted. Nothing fancy. Just something I picked up at a garage sale years ago. Sometimes after everyone is asleep, I play quietly. It helps me remember who I used to be. Sebastian was struggling to understand how someone could sacrifice so much. His entire life had been built around his music career. His parents had supported him every step of the way, paying for the best teachers, the best schools, the best opportunities. He had never had to choose between music and survival. Your brothers, he said slowly. Where are they now? Maria's face lit up for the first time since she had started telling her story. David is a doctor now, working at Children's Hospital downtown. Miguel is a teacher at the elementary school here in the neighborhood. They both turned out wonderful despite everything. They must be so grateful for what you sacrificed for them, Sebastian said. They don't see it as a sacrifice, Maria replied. They just see it as love. Which is exactly how I want them to see it. Sebastian looked at this woman with new eyes. She had given up everything. A promising career, recognition, financial security, her dreams, to take care of her family. And she had done it without bitterness, without regret. The depth of character that took was something Sebastian had never encountered before. The way you played tonight, he said quietly. All that emotion, all that maturity in your interpretation, it came from your life experience, didn't it? From everything you've been through. Maria nodded. Professor Volkov used to say that the best musicians aren't the ones with the most talent or the most training. They're the ones who have lived enough life to have something real to say through their music. Sebastian realized that despite all his technical perfection, all his awards and accolades, he had never had anything real to say. His music was impressive but empty, skillful but soulless. Maria had just shown him the difference between playing notes and making music. The crowd had mostly dispersed by now, with people heading home for dinner and evening routines. But Sebastian couldn't bring himself to leave. He found himself sitting on a folding chair near the piano, watching Maria as she gently ran her fingers along the piano's edge, as if saying goodbye to an old friend. Professor Volkov, Sebastian said suddenly. I've always wondered what it would have been like to study with her. She retired before I got to Wellington. They say she was the greatest piano teacher who ever lived. Maria turned toward him, surprised that he was still there. She was extraordinary. But not in the way you might think. What do you mean? Maria sat down on the piano bench again, but this time facing away from the keys toward Sebastian. Most people think great music teachers are the ones who push you to play faster, more accurately, more impressively. Professor Volkov was different. She taught us to listen. Listen to what? To everything. To the silence between notes. To the story the composer was trying to tell. To what your own heart was saying when you played. Maria paused, gathering her thoughts. She used to say that anyone could learn to move their fingers quickly across keys. But learning to speak through music, that was something much deeper. Sebastian leaned forward, fascinated. How did she teach that? She would make us play the same piece dozens of different ways. Happy, sad, angry, peaceful, lonely, hopeful. She'd say the notes are just letters. You have to decide what words you're trying to spell with them. I've never heard teaching described like that before. Maria smiled at the memory. One time she had me play Chopin's Minute Waltz. The same piece you played today, actually. I played it perfectly, just like you did. Fast, accurate, impressive. When I finished, she just sat there for a minute, then asked me, "What did you just say?" "What did you tell her?" I said I didn't understand the question. So she had me play it again. But this time she told me to imagine I was dancing at my wedding. The third time I had to play it like I was remembering someone I had lost. The fourth time like I was trying to make a child laugh. Sebastian was quiet, trying to imagine how the same piece could tell so many different stories. By the fifth time, Maria continued, I finally understood what she meant. The notes were the same, but the meaning was completely different each time. That's when I realized that technique is just the tool. The real music comes from what you're trying to communicate. I don't think I've ever played a piece thinking about what I wanted to communicate, Sebastian admitted. I just focused on playing it correctly. There's nothing wrong with that, Maria said kindly. Perfect technique is important, but it's just the beginning, not the end. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, processing everything Maria had told him. Finally, he asked, Would you be willing to show me what Professor Volkov taught you about playing with emotion? Maria looked surprised. You want me to teach you? I know it sounds crazy. You're not a professional teacher, and I'm supposed to be the expert here. But what you did tonight, that's something I've never learned how to do. I've spent my whole life trying to impress people with my skill, but I've never moved anyone the way you just moved that entire room. Maria was quiet for so long that Sebastian started to worry he had offended her. But finally she spoke. I haven't taught anyone in over 15 years, and I certainly never imagined teaching someone of your caliber. My caliber? Sebastian laughed, but not unkindly. After tonight, I'm not sure I know what my caliber actually is. I can play fast and I can play accurately, but I don't know if I can play meaningfully. Maria studied his face as if trying to determine whether he was being sincere. Why is this important to you? You're already successful. You have everything most musicians dream of. Sebastian was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer that question honestly, because tonight, for the first time in my life, I heard what music could really be, and I realized that everything I've been doing is just empty. Impressive maybe, but empty. That's not true, Maria said gently. Your playing tonight was beautiful, technically perfect, but it didn't touch anyone's heart, did it? Not the way yours did. Maria couldn't argue with that. The difference between their performances had been obvious to everyone in the room. Besides, Sebastian continued, I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about the piano sounding lonely. You were right. I was playing for myself, not for the audience. I was showing off instead of sharing. Maria was surprised by his honesty. Most successful people she had met weren't willing to admit their weaknesses so openly. If I were to teach you, she said slowly, it wouldn't be like any lessons you've had before. Professor Volkov's methods are unconventional. I'm willing to try anything, Sebastian said eagerly. It's not about trying harder or practicing more. In fact, you might have to learn to practice less, to think less, to feel more. Sebastian nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what that meant. When could we start? Maria laughed softly. You really are serious about this, aren't you? More serious than I've ever been about anything. Maria looked around the community center at the beautiful piano that would probably sit silent most of the time because no one felt qualified to play it. An idea was starting to form in her mind. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned that they're hoping to start music programs here eventually. She said thoughtfully, Maybe we could help each other. What do you mean? You want to learn to play with emotion. I've been away from music for too long and I miss it more than I realized until tonight. Maybe we could meet here once a week. You could learn Professor Volkov's techniques, and I could remember what it feels like to be a musician again. Sebastian's face lit up. That would be incredible. Are you sure you have time? I don't want to interfere with your work or your family. My boys are grown now, Maria said. David works long hours at the hospital and Miguel has his own life. I have more free time than I've had in 20 years. I just haven't known what to do with it. And maybe, Sebastian added, getting excited about the possibilities, we could eventually start teaching some of the kids in the neighborhood. Share what we both know. Maria's eyes brightened at the suggestion. I've always wanted to teach children. There's something so pure about the way kids approach music. They don't worry about being perfect, they just play. So you'll do it? You'll teach me? Maria looked at the piano, then back at Sebastian. For the first time in decades, she was thinking about music not as something she had lost, but as something she could rediscover. Yes, she said finally, but you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll be patient with yourself, learning to play with emotion after years of focusing only on technique. It's like learning a new language. It takes time. Sebastian nodded eagerly. I promise. When can we start? Maria smiled. How about next Saturday afternoon? Same time as today? I'll be here, Sebastian said immediately. As they shook hands on their agreement, both of them felt something they hadn't expected, excitement about music in a way they hadn't experienced in years. For Sebastian, It was the promise of discovering depth he had never known existed. For Maria, it was the possibility of returning to the world she had never stopped loving. Saturday afternoon couldn't come fast enough for Sebastian. He had spent the entire week thinking about Maria's performance and what she might teach him. He arrived at the community center 15 minutes early, carrying a leather bag filled with sheet music and a notebook where he had written down every question he wanted to ask. Maria was already there, sitting quietly at the piano with her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing the same simple clothes as before, jeans and a plain sweater, but something about her seemed different. More confident, maybe, more at home. "You're early," she said with a smile as Sebastian walked in. "I've been looking forward to this all week," he admitted, setting down his bag. "I brought some pieces I thought we could work on. Mozart, Beethoven, some Chopin." Maria held up her hand gently. "Before we get to any specific pieces, we need to talk about something more basic." Sebastian pulled out his notebook, ready to write down whatever wisdom she was about to share. "I'm ready." "Put the notebook away," Maria said kindly. "What I'm going to teach you can't be written down." Sebastian looked confused but closed the notebook. "Okay, what do we start with then?" "Tell me why you started playing piano," Maria said. "Why I started?" Sebastian thought for a moment. "My parents enrolled me in lessons when I was 5. They said I had natural talent and that music would be good for my development. But why did you keep playing? What made you want to continue?" Sebastian had never really thought about that question before. "I was good at it. I won competitions. My teachers were impressed. My parents were proud." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "So you played because you were successful at it?" "I guess so." "Isn't that normal?" "It's very normal," Maria agreed. "But it's not the only reason people play music." "Can you remember the first time music made you feel something? Not proud or accomplished, but emotionally moved?" Sebastian was quiet for a long time, thinking back through years of lessons and performances and competitions. Finally, he shook his head. "I don't think I can remember a specific moment like that." "That's okay," Maria said. "That just means we're starting from the beginning, which is actually perfect." She turned to face the piano and played a single note, middle C, letting it ring out until it faded to silence. "What did you hear?" she asked. Sebastian looked at her like she might be joking. "A C note. What else?" What do you mean, what else?" "It's just a note." Maria played the same note again, but this time she pressed the key more gently and held it for longer. "How about now?" Sebastian listened more carefully, but he still wasn't sure what she wanted him to hear. "It's softer?" "Close the eyes," Maria said. "Don't think about what note it is or how it's being played. Just listen to the sound itself." Sebastian felt a little silly, but he closed his eyes. Maria played the note again, and this time something was different. Without the visual distraction of watching her hands, without thinking about technique or theory, Sebastian could hear something he had never noticed before. The note had a kind of warmth to it, a richness that seemed to fill the entire room. "Better," Maria said. "Now I'm going to play the same note 5 different ways. Don't try to analyze how I'm doing it. Just tell me what each one makes you feel." The first note was sharp and quick, like a door slamming. The second was gentle and lingering, like a sigh. The third was hesitant, uncertain. The fourth was bold and confident. The fifth was sad, almost like crying. "That's incredible," Sebastian said, opening his eyes. "I never realized one note could have so many different personalities." "Every note is like a word," Maria explained. "The same word can mean completely different things depending on how you say it. The word hello can be happy, sad, angry, questioning, loving. Notes work the same way. So how do you control that? What's the technique?" Maria smiled. "There you go, thinking about technique again. The technique isn't the important part. The feeling is what matters. The technique just follows naturally." She demonstrated by playing a simple major scale, but each note had a different emotional quality. The scale told a story as it went up and down, like someone walking through different moods. "I don't understand how you do that," Sebastian admitted. "Because you're trying to understand it with your mind instead of your heart," Maria said. "Let me ask you something. When you're happy, do you have to think about how to smile? When you're sad, do you have to remember the technique for crying?" "No, of course not. Music is the same way. When you really feel something, the expression comes naturally. The problem is that most classical training teaches people to control their feelings, to be disciplined and precise. Those are good skills, but they can get in the way of emotional expression." Sebastian was starting to see what she meant. So how do I learn to feel the music instead of just playing it? We start with simple exercises. Not scales or etudes, but emotional exercises. Maria moved over on the piano bench and patted the space beside her. Sit here. We're going to play together. Sebastian sat down next to her and Maria placed his right hand over hers on the keys. I'm going to play a simple melody and I want you to feel what my hands are doing. Not the notes, but the intention behind them. She began playing a gentle, flowing melody that Sebastian didn't recognize. At first he was focused on trying to figure out what piece it was and what key it was in. But gradually he started to feel something else. The way Maria's hand moved with such purpose. The way each note seemed to grow naturally out of the one before it. Now you try, she said, moving her hand away. Play the same melody, but don't worry about getting the notes exactly right. Focus on making it feel the same way. Sebastian tried to reproduce what he had felt, but his playing came out mechanical and stiff. I can't do it. I keep thinking about the notes. That's normal, Maria assured him. You've been trained for over 20 years to think about notes first. It's going to take time to retrain your brain. They spent the next hour working on what Maria called feeling exercises. She would play short melodies that expressed different emotions, joy, sadness, anger, peace, and Sebastian would try to copy not just the notes, but the feeling behind them. It was frustrating for Sebastian, who was used to mastering new techniques quickly. His playing kept reverting to his old style, technically perfect, but emotionally flat. I'm not getting this, he said. After a particularly unsuccessful attempt at playing something hopeful. You're trying too hard, Maria said. Let me tell you something Professor Volkov used to do with students who had your problem. What's that? She would make them stop practicing piano completely for a week. Sebastian looked horrified. Stop practicing? But I practice 4 hours every day. I have to maintain my technique. Your technique is already perfect, Maria reminded him. What you need to develop is your emotional vocabulary. And you can't do that by playing piano. You have to do it by living life. I don't understand. Maria stood up from the bench and walked over to the window. This week I want you to do something different every day. Go somewhere you've never been. Talk to someone you wouldn't normally talk to. Listen to music you've never heard before. Watch people and try to understand what they're feeling. How is that going to help my piano playing? Because music is about human emotions, Sebastian. If you don't understand human emotions, you can't express them through music. Right now, your emotional range is very limited because your life experiences have been limited. Sebastian was quiet, thinking about what she had said. It was true that his life had been pretty narrow. School, practice, performances, more school, more practice. He had never really taken time to just observe the world around him. What if I forget my technique while I'm not practicing? He asked. Maria laughed gently. After 20 years of daily practice, you're not going to forget how to play piano in 1 week. Trust me. Okay, Sebastian said reluctantly.
I'll try it.
But this feels completely backwards from everything I've ever been taught. Good, Maria said. That means we're making progress. The week without piano practice was one of the strangest weeks of Sebastian's life. For the first time since he was 5 years old, he didn't touch a piano for 7 full days. Instead, he followed Maria's advice and tried to experience life in ways he never had before. On Monday, he took a bus instead of his usual expensive car service. He sat next to an elderly woman who told him about her grandchildren and a young man who was nervous about a job interview. Sebastian found himself really listening to people for the first time, noticing the emotions in their voices, the hope and worry and excitement that colored their words. Tuesday, he went to a jazz club in a part of the city he had never visited. The music was completely different from the classical pieces he knew. Looser, more improvisational, full of surprises. He watched the musicians communicate with each other through their instruments, having conversations without words. Wednesday, he volunteered at a soup kitchen, something his publicist had suggested months ago, but he had never found time for. He saw how music playing softly in the background seemed to comfort people who were having the worst days of their lives. An old man hummed along to a song on the radio while eating his meal, and Sebastian realized that music could be a source of hope even in the darkest circumstances. By the time Saturday rolled around again, Sebastian was eager to get back to the piano, but for completely different reasons than usual. He wasn't thinking about technique or competitions or impressing anyone. He was thinking about all the emotions he had witnessed during the week, and wondering if he could somehow express them through music. Maria was waiting for him at the community center, and she could immediately see that something had changed. Sebastian looked more relaxed, more present than she had ever seen him. "How was your week?" she asked. "Eye-opening," Sebastian replied. "I never realized how much I was missing by staying in my own little bubble." "Tell me about it." Sebastian described his experiences, the conversations with strangers, the jazz club, the soup kitchen, the simple act of walking through neighborhoods and really seeing the people who lived there. "I started noticing things I never paid attention to before," he said. "The way a mother's voice changes when she talks to her baby. How music in a coffee shop affects the mood of everyone in the room. The sound of kids laughing in a playground." Maria smiled. "And how did all of this make you feel?" "Connected," Sebastian said, surprising himself with the answer. "For the first time in my life, I felt connected to other people instead of separate from them." "Perfect," Maria said. "Now let's see if we can bring that feeling to your playing." She led him to the piano and asked him to play the same simple scale he had struggled with the week before. But this time, something was different. The notes still sounded like Sebastian's precise technique, but there was something warmer underneath, something more human. "Better," Maria said. "Much better. Now I want you to try something new." She asked Sebastian to think about one specific moment from his week, something that had moved him emotionally, and then try to express that feeling through music. He chose the memory of the old man humming at the soup kitchen, the way music had seemed to give him comfort despite his difficult circumstances. Sebastian placed his hands on the keys and began to play, not from any sheet music, but from the feeling inside him. The melody was simple, nothing technically impressive, but it carried something that his playing had never had before. Genuine emotion. "That's it," Maria said excitedly. "That's exactly what I was hoping for. Do you feel the difference?" Sebastian did feel it. The music wasn't just coming from his fingers anymore. It was coming from his heart, from his memory of that moment, from his understanding of what comfort could sound like. Over the next several weeks, Maria continued working with Sebastian on what she called emotional technique. They practiced playing the same pieces in dozens of different ways, each one expressing a different feeling or telling a different story. Sebastian learned to play Chopin's Minute Waltz as a celebration, as a memory, as a dance, as a goodbye. Each version used the same notes, but they were completely different pieces of music. He began to understand what Maria meant when she said that notes were just letters. The real music was in what words you spelled with them. More importantly, Sebastian's entire approach to music was changing. He stopped thinking about impressing audiences and started thinking about communicating with them. He began to see each performance not as a demonstration of his skill, but as an opportunity to share something meaningful with other people. Word about their weekly sessions began to spread around the neighborhood. Children would sometimes gather outside the community center on Saturday afternoons, listening to the music coming from inside. Parents started asking Maria if she would consider teaching their kids. "What do you think?" Maria asked Sebastian one day after they had finished their lesson. "Would you be interested in helping me start a music program here?" Sebastian didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. I think I'm finally ready to teach something worth learning." They started small with just a few neighborhood children who showed interest in music. Maria taught them the basics: how to sit at the piano, how to read simple notes, how to move their fingers correctly. But Sebastian taught them something equally important: how to listen, how to feel, how to express themselves through music. The children took to this approach naturally. Unlike Sebastian, they didn't have years of rigid training to overcome. They played with joy and curiosity, making mistakes without embarrassment, finding their own ways to make the piano sing. Watching them, Sebastian realized how much his own musical education had been focused on avoiding mistakes, rather than embracing expression. These kids weren't worried about playing perfectly. They just wanted to make sounds that felt good to them. "They're teaching me as much as I'm teaching them," Sebastian told Maria one day as they watched a 7-year-old girl play a simple melody with more soul than Sebastian had managed. "In his first 20 years of piano, that's the sign of a good teacher," Maria replied. "When you're learning as much as your students are." As the months passed, Sebastian found that his professional performing was improving as well. Critics who had always praised his technical skill began commenting on a new depth in his playing, an emotional maturity that hadn't been there before. Audiences responded differently to his concerts. They weren't just impressed anymore, they were moved. Sebastian's agent started getting requests for different types of performances. Instead of just classical recitals, people wanted him to play at community events, fundraisers, and intimate gatherings. His music had become more accessible, more human, and people were drawn to that authenticity. But the most rewarding part of his new approach to music was the time he spent at the community center. Every Saturday afternoon, he and Maria would work together, and then they would teach the children who had become their unofficial students. "You know," Maria said one Saturday as they were packing up after a particularly good session, "I never expected my life to come full circle like this." "What do you mean?" "I always thought I had given up music forever when I left school. I never imagined I would find my way back to it, or that I would be able to share what Professor Volkov taught me." Sebastian smiled. "I never imagined that the best teacher I would ever have would be someone I almost dismissed as an amateur." They both looked at the piano, which had become the center of so much learning and growth, not just for them but for all the children whose lives were being touched by music every week. "Professor Volkov would have loved this," Maria said softly. "What do you think she would say about what we're doing here?" Maria thought for a moment. "She would say that we finally understand what music is really for, not to show off or win competitions or impress critics, but to connect people, to share feelings, to make the world a little more beautiful." Sebastian nodded. "I wish I could thank her for what she taught you, even though I never met her." "You can thank her," Maria said with a smile. "Every time you play with real feeling, every time you help one of these kids discover their own musical voice, you're honoring what she believed in." As they walked out of the community center together, Sebastian realized that his entire life had been transformed by that one moment when he had challenged Maria to play. He had thought he was going to teach her a lesson about music, but instead, she had taught him what music could really be. 6 months after that first Saturday afternoon lesson, Sebastian stood backstage at the prestigious Thornton Concert Hall, preparing for what would be the most important performance of his career. But this wasn't like any concert he had given before. Tonight's performance was dedicated to the community center, with all proceeds going toward expanding their music education program. As he waited in the wings, Sebastian could see the audience filing into the grand concert hall. The usual crowd of wealthy patrons and classical music enthusiasts was there, but scattered throughout the audience were faces he recognized from the neighborhood, families from the community center, children from their Saturday afternoon music classes, and right in the front row, Maria herself. She was wearing a simple blue dress that she had probably bought especially for this occasion, her hair neatly styled, looking both proud and slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the concert hall. Next to her sat her 2 sons, David and Miguel, who had driven in from across the city to support their mother and the man who had become her unlikely musical partner. Sebastian took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The applause was warm but polite, the kind of reception he had received hundreds of times before. But tonight felt different. Tonight he wasn't just performing for an audience, he was sharing something personal, something that came from his heart rather than just his training. He sat down at the grand piano and adjusted the bench, taking a moment to center himself the way Maria had taught him. Instead of thinking about technique or trying to impress anyone, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. "Good evening," he said into the small microphone attached to the piano. 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything there was to know about music. I had trained at the best schools, studied with famous teachers, and performed on stages around the world. But I was wrong. The most important lesson I ever learned about music came from a woman in a community center who taught me that technique without heart is just noise. He looked directly at Maria, who was smiling encouragingly from the front row. "Tonight I want to share with you what she taught me. This first piece is Chopin's Minute Waltz, the same piece I played at that community center 6 months ago. But I'm going to play it the way I've learned to hear it, not as a showcase of speed and precision, but as a story about joy, about celebration, about the simple pleasure of being alive." Sebastian placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The familiar notes of the Minute Waltz filled the concert hall, but this version was completely different from his previous performances. Where once the piece had been a blur of technical perfection, now it danced and sang with genuine emotion. You could hear laughter in the quick passages, feel the spinning of dancers in the swirling melodies. The audience was immediately captivated. This wasn't the cold, impressive performance they had expected from Sebastian Hawthorne. This was music that spoke directly to their hearts, that made them want to smile and move and feel. When the piece ended, the applause was different too. Warmer, more enthusiastic, more genuine. People weren't just clapping because they were supposed to. They were clapping because they had been truly moved. That piece, Sebastian continued, was transformed for me by Maria Santos, a woman who sacrificed her own musical career to care for her family, but who never lost her understanding of what music is really meant to do. Maria, would you please stand up? Maria looked surprised and embarrassed, but the audience was already applauding enthusiastically as she stood and gave a small wave. Sebastian could see tears in her eyes. Tonight's concert is dedicated to Maria and to the Riverside Community Center, where we've been working together to bring music education to children who might not otherwise have access to it. Every dollar raised tonight will go toward instruments, sheet music, and expanding our program to serve more families. Sebastian continued his performance with pieces that told stories. Debussy's Clair de Lune played as a lullaby, a Bach invention that sparkled with curiosity, a Beethoven sonata that spoke of struggle and triumph. Each piece was technically flawless, but more importantly, each one communicated something real and human to the audience. Halfway through the concert, Sebastian surprised everyone by calling Maria to join him on stage. "I'd like Maria to share something with you," he announced. "This is the piece she played the first night I heard her, the moment that changed my entire understanding of music." Maria walked onto the stage, her nervousness obvious, but her dignity intact. She sat down at the piano next to Sebastian, and after a moment of hesitation, began to play the same arrangement of Clair de Lune that had stunned everyone at the community center. The concert hall fell absolutely silent as Maria's playing filled the space. Her interpretation was even more beautiful in this grand setting, with the acoustics of the hall amplifying every nuance of emotion in her performance. The audience was completely mesmerized, many of them with tears in their eyes as they experienced the kind of musical communication that most had never witnessed before. When she finished, the entire audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Maria sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the response, while Sebastian stood beside her applauding along with everyone else. "This is what music education is really about," Sebastian said when the applause finally died down. "Not just teaching children to play notes correctly, but helping them discover their own voices, their own ways of touching people's hearts through music." The rest of the concert continued with Sebastian and Maria taking turns at the piano, sometimes playing together, sometimes playing solo pieces that showcased their different approaches to music. The audience was treated to something unprecedented, a conversation between two musicians who had learned to speak the same emotional language despite their vastly different backgrounds. When the concert ended, the standing ovation lasted for nearly 10 minutes. People were wiping away tears, hugging each other, and clearly moved by what they had experienced. This wasn't just a piano recital. It had been a demonstration of music's power to connect human beings across all the barriers that usually separate them. Later, at the reception following the concert, Sebastian was surrounded by people wanting to talk about the performance. But he kept looking over at Maria, who was being congratulated by concertgoers who wanted to know more about her story and her approach to teaching. "Sebastian," called out Robert Thornton, the wealthy businessman whose donation had made the evening possible. "That was extraordinary. I've been attending classical concerts for 40 years and I've never experienced anything quite like that." "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," Sebastian replied, "but the real credit belongs to Maria. She's the one who opened my eyes to what music could really be." "I'd like to discuss expanding our support for your community program," Mr. Thornton continued. "After tonight, I think we need to do much more than just donate money. We need to help you reach more communities, train more teachers, touch more lives." As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Sebastian found himself alone with Maria in the now empty concert hall. They sat together on the stage, looking out at the rows of seats where hundreds of people had just experienced something magical. Can you believe this all started with you challenging me to a piano duel? Maria said with a laugh. I was so arrogant that night, Sebastian admitted. I thought I was going to teach you a lesson about music. You did teach me a lesson, Maria said. You taught me that it's never too late to come back to music, and that the best way to honor what you've learned is to share it with others. Sebastian looked around the concert hall where he had performed so many times before, but never with the sense of purpose and connection he had felt tonight. I keep thinking about what you said, Professor Volkov used to tell you, that the best musicians are the ones who have lived enough life to have something real to say through their music. She would have loved tonight, Maria said softly. She always believed that music was meant to bring people together, not to separate the talented from the untalented, the educated from the uneducated, the privileged from the unprivileged. We're really going to do this, aren't we? Sebastian said. Build something bigger than just our little Saturday afternoon classes. Maria nodded. With the support we receive tonight, we can reach so many more children. We can train other teachers in these methods. We can show people that music education isn't just about creating professional musicians, it's about creating human beings who understand how to communicate with their hearts. As they walked out of the concert hall together, Sebastian realized that his life had been completely transformed by that moment of arrogance 6 months ago. He had thought he was a complete musician when he was just a skilled technician. He had thought success meant impressing people when it really meant moving them. But most importantly, he had learned that the greatest musical achievements come not from individual brilliance, but from the connections we make with other people, as teachers and students, as performers and audiences, as human beings sharing the universal language of emotion through sound. The community center piano was waiting for them next Saturday, along with a group of children eager to learn not just how to play music,